The salt shaker will call to order the Monday, April 22nd, 2019 regular meeting of the Littleton Planning Commission. Could we please have the roll call?
Commissioner Miller?
Here.
Commissioner Coronado?
Here.
Commissioner Bolt?
Here.
Chair Rudnicki?
Here.
Commissioner Stallman?
Here.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Here. And Robin is sick, and Sherry is out of town, and I'm not sure about John, probably out of town. We do have a quorum. Next up is our Pledge of Allegiance. Could all please stand? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all.
Amen.
Amen.
Play ball.
Play ball, yeah. Okay, next up is minutes to, or approval of the agenda. Are there any changes, deletions, corrections? Seeing none, as usual, we'll move on to minutes of our last meeting to be approved, a certification of the April 8th, 2019 regular meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve, based on the recording secretary's certification, the April 8, 2019 action minutes of the Littleton Planning Commission.
Second. Okay, Jason has a second. Any comments? Please vote.
The vote.
You might want to turn that off.
The vote is 6 in favor. The motion carries
Jason's got a
unanimously.
second vote in? Okay.
Phantom vote.
Yeah, phantom vote. Next up is a, let's see, public comment for items not on tonight's agenda.
Chair Rudnicki?
Yes.
We need to amend the agenda to add a study session at the end.
Tonight.
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Is there any objection from planning commissioners wanting to watch the ball game or anything? Seeing none, we'll add that.
Thank you.
Can you tell us what it's concerning?
Probably.
Gary with KKC is available for a conference call this evening to talk about Envision Littleton.
Okay.
And then moving forward, this will be a standard part of each agenda that will have an Envision Littleton section of every meeting.
Okay. So with that, amended agenda, minutes to be approved. Well, we already did that. So public comment. Let's see. For items not on tonight's agenda, we do have two items: a public hearing concerning a rezoning on Sycamore Street, and then second item is an amendment to Littleton City Code regarding site development plans. So if you would like to speak on a subject other than that, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Please give your name, your address, or your council district. We expect the discourse to be civil. Like I say, you have 3 minutes to speak. When there's 30 seconds left, our recording secretary will hold up a yellow card. When your 3 minutes is up, she'll hold up the red card. We have a sign-up sheet. If you haven't signed up and wish to speak, you can do so. Pam Chadbourne is the one sign-up.
Good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Pam Chadbourne. I live a block and a half from here in District 1. So my comments tonight are about planning in general as a professional practice, and also they relate to Envision Littleton. Our Envision Littleton process is broken, and it's broken in a fundamentally flawed way. That's because we do not have a step in which we define our outcomes in terms of the city and objectives and guiding principles about what we're going to do. Those are the things that then you generate a document, and then you test the document by going back to those goals, objectives, and outcomes and saying, do the words accomplish what we said we wanted? It's vital. You may have noticed SpaceX had a failure of a rocket this week because they tested it. It wasn't when humans were on it. It was because they did design, they built something, and then they tested it before they put humans on it. And I'm going to tell you that people of Littleton deserve the same thing. So you test things before you put humans in them. And that's what's lacking in our process. So I'm going to mention a few things, may not get done, but we need some themes, and I'm going to suggest a theme. Remission for Littleton is transportation. We started as being on the river, and now we're between Broadway and Santa Fe. These are major corridors. Transportation should be one of our themes, and agriculture is another. Agriculture is going to change in the next 40 years. Denver Metro transportation will change. These are both good opportunities for our city. Another thing that's lacking, in which Planning Commission has not had a discussion about or allowed the public to contribute to, is a requirement for community gardens. When we increase density, you should have some standards for developers to, if they're increasing it beyond a certain amount, and we should limit that, or even that amount, we should have requirements for community gardens. And so far, that's completely lacking. And that's a horrible flaw for the future of Littleton. We had people before in charge who did a good job of that, but now it's failing, and that is a fundamental failure. The third thing is wildlife corridors. Again, if you're increasing density, and boy, what this board as a body has done to downtown Littleton by getting rid of setbacks has destroyed the ability of wildlife to travel. The Highline Canal Conservancy says we have tributaries to the South Platte, and one thing Littleton should and could consider is preserving those tributaries to the Platte. I have another one, but I'll bring that up another day. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Good. We'll move on. General business, we have nothing tonight. Next item is our first public hearing. This is PC Resolution 07, 2019, resolution recommending approval of request to eliminate a portion of land from a planned unit development. Before you start, we'll go around the horn. Who has visited the site, and did you talk to anyone?
I've walked by the site a number of times, but did not visit specifically for this occasion, and I did not talk to anyone other than my wife.
You may have to recuse yourself.
Yeah, that's right. Or swear her in. Okay.
I visited the site on Saturday. I did not speak with anyone.
I visited the site Saturday, did not speak to anyone.
I drove by the site and didn't talk to anybody.
I've been by the site several times, but haven't spoken to anybody.
I've been by the site several times and have not spoken to anybody.
Okay, thank you. We'll have our staff presentation.
Thank you. I'm Andrea Mimnall with the planning staff, and this is an agenda item regarding the Sycamore Street PDO amendment. The PDO amendment proposes to eliminate a portion of a PDO from when the existing area of the PDO in order to develop the land with the underlying zone district, which is CA. And so the applicant is requesting approval of his PDO amendment application. And it is located at 5546 and 5548 Sycamore Street. Just a quick overview of the presentation. First, there's going to be a little bit about the process of approval of a PDO amendment, and then we're going to talk a little bit about application details. In other words, what is the proposal? We're going to talk about the review criteria and analysis as that is stated in the code, and then a little bit on the staff recommendation and Planning Commission action, the options that Planning Commission will have for action tonight. The process for a PDO amendment is the same for a PDO. It goes to the Planning Commission for approval and does not move on to any other boards. If the PDO should be approved and the applicant wishes to move forward with development on the site, then that would require a site development plan. That's an administrative plan for approval and would address items such as zoning, grading, utilities, and design guidelines. So the PDO is located on Sycamore Street between Powers and Westbury. You can see it there within the yellow highlighted area of the map. Again, the address is 5546 and 5548 South Sycamore Street. It's in the downtown neighborhood, and it is zoned PDO-CA. I've put this diagram together to demonstrate what was the original boundary of the PDO, and that was that entire square there. The proposal is to eliminate the two unbuilt parcels on the left, as you see in the red circle. And I thought a little bit of background might be helpful on the PDO, just to go through that quickly. So there are 3 diagrams, and in diagram A, you can see in 2016, the original PDO was approved and include 4 parcels and 4 units, 1 dwelling on each parcel, and they are in duplex configuration. The PDO was approved for reduced front setback for each of the 4 units. There was an architectural design concept that went along with it, and there is a maximum on that PDO of 15 dwelling units per acre, which resulted in a maximum of 4 units for that lot size. Following the PDO approval the next year, one of the duplexes was built, and you see that in diagram B, 5556 and 5558. And construction was recently completed. The SDP did not include the other 2 parcels that you see there to the left. And then finally, we're at what's shown on diagram C at the bottom there. Now, the 2 parcels on the right, which are built and have COs, are not part of this application. It's just the unbuilt parcels over on the left-hand side. The applicant has submitted an illustrative site plan with the application, and this is not something that would necessarily be built. It's just to provide an idea of what could be built. And so their illustrative plan shows 4 dwelling units. You can see that the front 2 dwelling units have face onto South Sycamore Street, and then the other 2 units are there in the back. Access by vehicle is from the alley in the back, and like I said, 4 units total. And again, you can see the other part of the PDO, which is not a part of this PDO amendment. So I put together here a chart that gives you a comparison of what was approved with the PDO and what would be required under the CA zone district. So in the PDO requirement, a 9-foot front yard setback was established for all 4 of the units. If this should move to the CA zone requirements, we would use the code section called Predominant Front Setbacks at the time of the SDP development. Predominant Front Setbacks takes into account all the existing setbacks on the block face and averages them, and that becomes the setback for the new units. The applicant has done a preliminary study of what that predominant front setback would be based on today's existing conditions, and it is approximately 11 feet setback. On the second line here, there's no change, you see, to the side and rear setbacks. In both instances, there are 0 side setbacks. Moving down the line, the PDO was approved for a maximum of 3 stories. Since 2016, the CA code has changed, and now the maximum height is 40 feet of building height. That would most likely be up to a 3-story building. The maximum number of dwelling units for the PDO was 2, maximum 2 on those unbuilt parcels, and under the CA requirements, you could get a maximum of 10, and that's calculated from the CA zone density per the code of 5.75 dwelling units per acre, although hard to get 10 units on that lot due to its size. And then finally, the PDO at that time in 2016 was required to be compliant with the downtown design standards and guidelines. Today, that document has been revised, and now we have just the compliance with downtown design standards. In fact, the guidelines were converted to standards with that update. The PDO criteria, I haven't included them all here, but it's a full report is in your, full analysis is in your report. But the most pertinent one are, first of all, a special attention to creative, high-quality design. And the staff analysis really is that between 2016 and the present, a couple of things have happened to bring about a higher quality design. The first is that in the CA zone, there's been a doubling of the minimum open space required. At the time in 2016, it was minimum 10%, and now it's 20%. The other change is one that I just mentioned, and that has to do with the design standards. The design standards has followed what was the design standards and guidelines, and so effectively we have a document that now requires more compliance with what is the desired character of the downtown neighborhood through that document. PDOs also need to reinforce citywide and neighborhood goals, and I pulled out a couple of here. First is encourage architecture of place. It differentiates Littleton from other nearby communities. And again, that really goes to our design standards that were just approved this past July 2018. And the second one is apply the adopted design standards to all new construction. And this application is bringing a project that was subject to the design guidelines and standards and guidelines now to the updated one. So that would be a tighter, more difficult, compliant document to be required for this application. Staff found that all the criteria is met for the PDO amendment and is recommending approval. And the Planning Commission has several options with its action tonight. The options are approval with conditions, denial, or to continue to a date certain. So that completes my presentation. I'm available for questions. And also the applicant is here. The applicant has a presentation prepared and is prepared to be called up when Planning Commission is ready.
Okay, questions of staff of a technical nature, and I just want to harp on technical questions. In the past, planning commissioners have, some, not this group, have tended to give their summations of whether they like the project or not during their questioning of staff. I wish to avoid that. Obviously, as a planning commissioner, we need to look at all the evidence and then make a judgment. So that's why I always say questions of a technical nature. So we start with Dan. You want to go ahead and start?
Sure. I just have a couple questions. Is it a possibility, I understand they're basically reverting back to the CA zoning. Is there a possibility that that they could apply for a new PDO if they wanted to?
Yes, absolutely. So either if for some reason this application were not to go through tonight, their options would be to, do nothing or apply for another PDO amendment to potentially change the zoning to something else. Or down the line in the future, if, say, the developer changes his mind or there's yet another property owner, they would have the opportunity to apply for a PDO as well.
Dan, would you mind if I break in with a question?
Sure, absolutely.
Didn't we pass a regulation saying that there'll be no more PDOs of a residential nature in Littleton?
Thank you for reminding me that. That's absolutely true.
So they cannot come back,
they
or
cannot
anybody
come
else.
back.
This will be last time we're looking at a PDO of any kind for residential, correct?
Yes, although this one is an amendment to an existing PDO, and there would be a possibility to amend other residential PDOs. But as you say, there'd be no possibility to establish a new residential PDO.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Very good. Let's see, I saw that there was a public meeting, or I guess a neighborhood meeting.
Yes.
Do we know of what those comments were?
The applicant can speak to that. I did see the roster, and it appears that one person attended.
Okay.
The applicant can confirm that.
Okay. And then, I don't know, maybe if, it sounds like you have not reviewed the proposed site plan for code or zoning compliance. Is that correct at this point?
That's correct, because it's not only zoning compliance, but the design standards and utilities and drainage, and sometimes, one of those, zoning can impact some of those other criteria. And so at the time of SDP, we would do the full review.
Okay. And just one other question. So does, it looks like there's 4 dwelling units proposed. Is there a distinction between townhomes and multifamily? And it sounds like multifamily, 4 units of multifamily would not be allowed, but it could be allowed if there's 4 townhomes. Is that correct?
Well, in the CA zone, there are both townhomes and multifamily permitted.
Yeah, I just noticed in table 10.3.2, the land use table, that multifamily residence is 4 or more units is not a permitted use. But I guess if they call it a townhome, then that's, is that still? And maybe that's all going to be caught when you review it for zoning compliance. I just was curious.
Yes, so I believe what the applicant is planning to do is to develop those units, and they would appear to be, well, I think there are actually 2 definitions of townhomes, and one is a technical definition where you have 1 dwelling unit on 1 lot, and so you would have the 4 lots, 1 with each. But the other more general definition of townhome is just simply units that all have access to the exterior and sit on land, but they could all be on 1 lot. And I believe that is the one that the applicant is looking at developing, that definition of townhome.
All right. That's all I have.
Great.
Okay. Hi, Andrea. I was a little confused by the staff analysis in the report. So in amending a PDO to basically eliminate it, you have to meet the same criteria as the original PDO, which includes things like demonstrating special attention to creative high-quality design and so on. Say we went through the process and eliminated the PDO, there's no PDO in place to ensure that the high design quality, those criteria are met.
I see what you mean, and what the staff determined was that because of those 2 changes, being the additional amount of open space required from 10 to 20%, and the new document for design standards that replaces the design standards and guidelines, that would in effect bring about high-quality design.
That was the only question I have at this time.
Hey, David?
I forget, what constitutes open space? Driveways, patios, gardens?
Unobstructed open space is defined as areas on which there is no structure and areas on which you do not drive. So it will be landscaped areas, sidewalks, and other sorts of usable things such as pergolas.
That would be allowed if there was a pergola, or? I'm sorry.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. And then it has to be at ground level too, right?
Yes, generally so, yes. I think a pergola would also be allowed.
No, I mean, if they had a patio on a second floor, that's not open space.
Oh, I see what you mean. Exactly. We do not allow second-story patios to be counted towards unobstructed open space.
Or rooftop gardens or anything like that.
That's correct.
Okay. And then, do you remember what the setback was prior to the PDO being put in place?
Prior to the PDO, there was an analysis done in 2016 for that PDO, and I believe it was an 18.5-foot setback, and that was based on the number of older homes that were on the block at that time, which happened to be further setback.
Mm-hmm. And so now that they've demolished some of these homes,
Yeah.
and I guess we approved a 9-foot setback originally for the PDO,
Mhm.
Now the setback creeps forward. It seems like that's kind of a, in the time that I've been on this commission, it seems like setbacks just kind of creep towards the street without, there's never a point where setbacks go back towards the middle of the lot, I guess. Do you have that same experience, or?
We haven't had a lot of experience with predominant setbacks on one block face like we have here. Here we've already had 2 PDOs, which total 6 units. And that's a little bit unusual downtown. It seems that we're applying predominant setbacks on this block face, and on this one, and this one over here. But I agree with you that you tend to creep forward rather than backward.
Mm-hmm. And because you don't count vacant lots as having a setback, obviously, right?
That's correct.
Okay, that's all I got. Thanks.
Jason?
Sure. So just to reiterate a couple points I think have been covered, but they're good to perhaps get in the record. So I just wanted to clarify, so the current landscape area is 10% under the existing PDO, and they're proposing with stripping this out, it would increase?
Well, the existing PDO had a minimum 10% unobstructed open space requirement. And based actually, just as an aside, based on the SDP that was approved for the other 2 lots, I think the actual amount of open space was little upwards of 18%. Now, with the proposal, if approved, the minimum will be 20% unobstructed open space.
Thank you. And then the current setback is 9 feet, and it would be increasing if the PDO is removed.
Likely. We calculated again at the time of the SDP application.
All right. Thank you.
Bruce?
Based on the table you had, the open space issue aside, it appears that it may appear that a principal variable between the PDO and the CA zone was an extra 10 foot of building height. Is that, how do you weigh that in terms of determining the staff's opinion that they've met their, criteria?
Yes, it's a good question. Typically, it will be very difficult to actually get 4 stories in 40 feet, especially with the design guidelines that require some level of pitched roof. And so, you think of 8 to 10 foot living space, but there's also that space in between the floors that adds on to it as well.
So, based on, and this, I think, goes to one of the other comments about the, above requirements. This is on the staff report, page 6, talking about the design standards and touching on urban design, architectural design, building materials, and landscaping. And the above requirements generate a high-quality design. The criteria appears to be met. That's strikes me as sort of a bold assertion, given we haven't seen anything you guys haven't seen anything. I mean, there's ways to do things that presumably they'll pay attention to, but on the other hand, until we see an actual rendering, or you do, and
Well, our analysis was actually, I guess we have a lot of faith in the new design standards booklet. We haven't had a lot of development come about since we've adopted that. The city adopted that in July. But it does take all of what used to be guidelines and non-enforceable and convert them into standards. And so this is, I think, just one of many pieces that we're going to see over time in terms of code changes, design guidelines that will bring about a higher quality of design that's more consistent with the downtown and what the community is looking for. We felt that, again, the design standards and the additional 10% of unobstructed open space met that criterion.
okay. The orientation of this parcel as it stands at the moment, and I'm just trying to take the whole thing in, given that we're going to make a decision on the basis of concept as opposed to anything that's any more tangible in terms of visions or drawings or any of this kind of thing. But I mean, if you've got 20% open space, you've got predominant setbacks, and you've got 40-foot buildings, and the orientation on at least 2 or 3 of the units is going to be basically looking at the office building right next door because they're going to face north, at least according to the drawing that was in here.
Mm-hmm.
What's your interpretation of all that? I mean, is that something that and maybe a better way to say it is this. We've been, I don't recall too many instances where we've had the same parcel rezoned repetitively. So went from CA to PDO back to, now it's potentially back to CA, this kind of thing. And there's an element of, an intentional element of stability in the zoning code such that there can be reliance on what's in there. Is it, with all of what's being proposed here and then moving from one back to the other in a fairly short period of time, have there been other examples that you can think of where we've seen, parcels that have gone through these kinds of gyrations in a relatively short time horizon?
There may have been 1 or 2 PDs that were approved only to request a PD amendment within a few years, but I can't name them at this point.
Okay, all right. But it was usually going from PD. We haven't had any going back from PD to CA, or to the underlying zone district. Nothing, Joe?
Not that I can recall.
Yeah, I don't either. Okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, Mike Sutherland, Deputy Community Development Director, I can't think of another example quite like this either. My understanding, and the applicant is here to speak tonight too, my understanding is that originally the PDO had one ownership and they planned to build both duplexes. And the one owner built the one duplex and decided to sell off the other piece. And now the new owner is not as interested in building a duplex on the property, and that's why we're discussing this tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Andrea, could you, for our listening audience and perhaps some planning commissioners, maybe even me, define what is open space and what is not? Is a driveway open space?
Yes, it's the full term is unobstructed open space, and it includes areas with landscaping, sidewalks, and other things for enjoyment by residents or others, but areas that do not count towards unobstructed open space are areas where there is a structure or areas on which you drive.
Okay. Good.
Can I just ask
Sure,
one quick question
course.
as a follow-up? Because I asked kind of the same question, that I was remembering why I asked the question, because there's in the plan here, there's a spot for grass paver system, which presumably you can drive on, but there's grass on it.
That would not be counted towards open space.
Okay.
If you can drive on it, it won't count.
We're reverting back to a CA and then conforming to all CA regulations, except we're not reverting back to the 18.5 setback that this site was originally. Can you explain why? I assume it's because of the 3 or 4 houses that were demolished, which changes the equation, which would be an interesting little trick to get around the original setback.
Yes, so the zoning code has a section on front setbacks, and it's called Predominant Front Setbacks. It applies to all residential zone districts. And so anytime you have new development within a residential zone district, what you are to do to establish that setback is to determine the average of the existing setbacks on that block face. And that becomes your setback for new development, your minimum setback for development. That is across the city, that requirement. And I believe that the idea behind it is to create some consistency with front setbacks, rather than having a specific number, and particularly in downtown, because many of those homes were built before there was any zoning at all. It wouldn't necessarily be desirable to have a block face with rather small front setbacks and require a large setback for new development. In terms of urban design, that might not be desirable.
Let's see. Anything else? Standards to guidelines, standards and guidelines, the way it used to be written was driving a Mack truck through the guidelines. They were completely ignored. So I think you're correct in saying that the standards have, now just standards and no guidelines, it toughens up the requirements for, let's say, competent or outstanding design in the downtown area. I think that's, one last comment. This has happened a couple of times in our last few meetings. The neighborhood meeting roster and comments has not been included in our packets. It needs to be included in our packets from now on.
Okay.
And hopefully in the future, any comments that come in could be given to us sooner than 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock on the Monday before our meeting. We all have jobs, and it'd be nice to get that information sooner.
Sure.
So, any other technical questions? See none, thanks. We might get back to you. Applicant, wish to make a presentation?
Thank you, Andrea. Commission, good evening. Paul Bryant, Bryant Flink Architecture and Design.
And I'm Rebecca Wilson with Bryant Flink Architecture and Design.
If you could speak directly and loudly into the microphone. We have very poor acoustics here.
Dave DeVoe, sorry. Dave DeVoe, I'm the owner.
Sorry.
Good evening. Andrea, thank you again. Frankly, we think that staff covered the application fairly well. We're here to answer any questions. I mean, the long and the short is that we're asking to just revert back to the base zoning. And with that, we'll be increasing open space from 10 to 20%. And then the front setback, which we talked about, the predominant front setback, will in this case go from 9 to 11 foot 3 inches, which during site development would be surveyed and verified for a true dimension there. Obviously, we'll be held to the new design standards. But with regard to that, I think it's important to think, and I know that the commission went by the site, the duplex that was built with under 20% open space, you can envision the mass of the structure there. The proposed development, and though we haven't gone through site development and we haven't been cut loose to really craft a new structure, ostensibly would be within the same envelope, the same mass that duplex currently has. In fact, it would be less massive because of the requirement for greater open space. So if you envision residential architecture with pitched roofs, hipped, gabled, or otherwise, having to conform to a 40-foot height limit, not stories, so 40 feet, the building is going to be low-slung, more residential in character than what could be permitted under the existing PDO. Now, the nature of the alley is fortunate, so the block face will be presented with a residential appearance with front doors, etc., and not have a slot development that we see so common throughout our cities today. So from the pedestrian vantage along Sycamore, frankly, it'll be fairly similar to the duplex that's there now. Now, the advantage to a higher density obviously creates the opportunity for more attainable housing within our city. We all know that duplex there south of the site in question has been on the market for over 400 days. And that's not good for the city, and people just can't afford to live in a structure like that. So by able to spread land cost over multiple units, it brings more housing into an attainable threshold. But again, I think as the commission is concerned and through the design standards and by going back to the original CA zone district, the pedestrian experience along Sycamore, along the sidewalk with a greater setback and within the same mass envelope, it's going to be just as pedestrian oriented as a duplex, frankly. Let's see, I did want to, took some notes here. One comment, Commissioner Miller, on multifamily, townhome or condominiumized townhomes in this case. That's what this would be, but they would be a party wall, which would be separated so the structure is continuous from foundation to roof with a 2-hour firewall in between each unit. They are townhomes for all intents and purposes for the layperson, but these will be condominiums, legally speaking. But again, the structure will be continuous from foundation to the underside of the deck. Am I missing anything?
I think you got it.
Dave? So with that, Commission, any questions?
Start here. Jason, any questions?
No, I think I'm good.
Bruce?
First,
Am I breathing into it? Okay, so. Yeah. Is this better? Maybe like that.
see if you can help me understand your first comment about the 40-foot height with the greater open space will provide a more residential feel versus the duplexes next door because the implication was the mass of the duplexes was bigger than what you were going to end up being proposing here. Walk through that again, if you would. I was struggling with that.
No, I can see, see if I can make some clarity here. So the mass of the duplex, I mean, it's a striking, it's a handsome building. The hipped roofs, sort of a Roby-esque, Usonian style, and it has striking. Now, the 3 stories versus 40 feet, the 40 feet is actually more restrictive in terms of a design conformance than just stories. And Andrea alluded to this in some cases, but typically in residential design, nominal stud lengths come in 104 inches basically, and you stack them up and with your floor assemblies, and then you add another floor, and pretty soon you're up to 30 feet if you go 3 stories, but then you need to put pitched roofs on there. We're in number 2 district with sub-area 2, sorry, forgive me, and Mark, you and I, but so anyway, so you have to have pitched roofs in here. So when you start stacking up stories, and then you have to put pitched roofs on them, you hit that 40-foot height limit pretty quickly. And in order to have a pitched roof, where the gable or the hip has to spring off the walls, forces your building down, and then creates the gabled end or the hipped end. And so when you think about the mass of the duplex, and you can look here on the aerial, you can see the roof structure of the duplex directly south. And I mean, it's literally taking up the entire lot, right? Now they're entering the garages from the alley, and to the commission's point, and to Andrea's point, our driveway does not contribute to our open space calc.
Right.
So obviously we're going to be getting more light and air into the site, but the overall conformance of a 40-foot height limit is that we're restricted by the pitch and just the nominal layers of construction. Now, if we were just based on stories, you theoretically could buy a 12-foot long stud, you could buy a 14-foot long stud, and you theoretically could just ratchet up 3 stories pretty quickly.
Okay. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
Yeah.
Done?
Yeah.
David?
I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, hi, a couple of questions. One is, I think you mentioned the 11.3 setback that's being requested, 11.3 feet, I guess it is. The zoning matrix table says 10.9. Is that a discrepancy? Which is correct?
Yeah, that's, we actually had to recalculate because the All Health building actually fronts on Berry there, so that was taken out of the equation, and so 11.3 is the accurate.
11.3 is correct. It says the building next door, then that's a side setback, then it's not a front setback?
That's correct.
Okay. Second question is, I see by the diagram that you're right, this is a less massive building, and I think you said it was mainly due to the 20% open space requirement, but it's also due to the driveway requirements and access requirements, which you wouldn't have with the townhouse.
Correct.
Or townhome, okay. And then, can you save that huge spruce tree on the corner there? It's like 60 feet tall, I think.
It's in the northwest corner.
Yeah, northwest corner, yeah.
I think there's opportunity to keep structures that are trees like that, absolutely. Is that on our property or is it in the house?
It's not on, it looks like it's on the adjacent property.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, certainly, and maybe we can get our resident landscape architect, Dave, to come out and look at the drip line and our, we can get out there and see. But currently, we'd be potentially out of the drip line.
Like it
might be able
work.
to keep it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So there was one person at the neighborhood meeting?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Yeah, it was a little lonely. One person showed up right away, and then a couple hours of just me.
So any comment, or did they live nearby, or what can you tell us?
He lived
about
nearby. He owns a lot, a couple lots down. I was just kind of curious. He was thinking about potentially selling his lot. We talked for a couple minutes. He gave me his number. He seemed fine with it, but then he took off, and that was about it.
Okay. Thank you.
There was one comment about the north wall of the units facing onto the parking lot. The way you have it drawn against the property line, I know this is just conceptual. You wouldn't be allowed to have any windows on that wall anyway, just to meet fire code ratings, correct?
Correct, yeah. We would not have any unprotected openings along that wall. However, the commission, rest assured that the building will be pulled off to create unprotected openings along the north side. It was something that we certainly need for the fenestration and the design, and just for livable units, frankly.
I have no other questions other than just eyes will be looking very closely on the architecture style of your buildings,
Good.
Considering your influence on the guidelines and standards becoming standards. There'll be a lot of sidewalk superintending.
We would
relish
look
the
forward to that,
opportunity.
yes, absolutely. I will one thing, and Andrea, and I know the commission. There was some comment about renderings and elevations and things. That's all part of the standard SDP process that the city goes through, and so that still has to happen. That process still has to happen.
Yes.
So we're not circumventing.
This is
the
a
commission.
zoning issue from
Exactly.
PDO to CA, I understand.
Yes. Okay.
Any other questions of the applicant? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Open it
Commissioner.
up to, thank you. Open it up to public comment. Again, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Please give your name and your address or your district number. We expect the discourse, again, to be civil. When you have 30 seconds left, the infamous yellow card will be held up, and when your 3 minutes are up, the red card will be held up. We had one sign-up speaker, Pam Chadbourne. If you haven't signed up and you wish to speak, you'll have an opportunity.
I'm still Pam Chadbourne. I live 4 blocks from this site, and I talked at the original rezoning. First, I'm just going to make a comment that the surprise about how the setbacks have changed is disingenuous at best. I remember speaking at the original application, and this creeping setback change is this body's responsibility. You caused it. So don't be surprised. If I remember correctly, I think I looked this up, the other site was the one that violated the conditions of the PDO in 3 or 4 ways, and you folks required them to fix the structure as built. That's an interesting thing, but you wouldn't have the right to do this if this was reversed. Also, the person who bought this knew the zoning when they bought it. There is no obligation of the city to change this, and my second point about this is we heard nothing in the staff presentation that really talks about the city impact other than in general and what might happen. I'm not seeing the full picture of how this is better for the city. CA is a poor fit neighbor for what was built next door, and you can kind of see it there. The promise of this design is nice, but this owner could get the rezoning and sell it tomorrow. We don't even know. There could be something like that already existing. So the rezoning here and the promises of affordable housing and stuff like that really have no weight. So the setbacks have changed from about 20 feet to now down to 10, and that is a result of the decisions of this board. The claim that there will be high quality design here because of the new downtown design standards also is offensive to me. the new downtown design standards are not better than what we had. They eliminated several items which created the character of downtown, this concept of openness, the concept of looking out and seeing other houses and people playing on the street, kids playing on the street. That's gone. So claiming that somehow these are better and maintain the desired character of downtown, I'm going to tell you, I live here, and I know that the people I know don't think this is desired character, even older or newer residents. This is, I don't know the full impact of this. Like I said, I'm not sure the staff report, well, the staff report didn't explore the possibilities of what could be here. And so I'm not sure I trust this application. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Come on down. Give your name and address or district number or how many blocks you live away.
Will do. Hi, I'm Brooke Pfeiffer, and I live at 6897 South Gallup Street in Littleton. Been a resident for 35 years, and we also own buildings in South Park. And then we're at the, I'm in with a number of gentlemen in the building next door with Venture Resources. We support this application. We think it's a nice addition to the neighborhood. It seems to have more open volume to it than many of our neighbors, especially us. We have clearly over-designed for the neighborhood and subsequently haven't, of course, don't have our CO, but we haven't been able to sell the things yet for the neighborhood. It was too much for where we are. I think this is better suited for the demographics and the desires of the people. The market's been saying that. The others have been selling like wild cakes, and we haven't. So I support their application and wish them the best of luck.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment portion and entertain a motion and discussion.
I move to approve PC Resolution 07-2019, approving the planned development overlay amendment for 5556 South Sycamore Street.
You have a second?
Second.
Great. Okay. Discussion. We can go the usual up and down the row here.
Okay.
We'll start with you.
All right. Certainly, I plan on supporting the motion. I see this as reverting back to the original zoning for the area. Having reviewed the downtown design standards, they do acknowledge that multifamily can have a place in this portion of the downtown area in the design standards. They are increasing the open space by removing the PDO, albeit by 2% perhaps, but the minimum open space is potentially increasing as a result of this, as well as the setbacks, which certainly can acknowledge that previous PDOs and construction on this block have modified what the standard block face is on Sycamore Street. However, the proposal would have to comply with the new block face. And I have full confidence in staff and in our new design standards to enforce the pitched roofs and the character of this block, perhaps even more than some of the existing structures that are there.
Bruce?
I think Commissioner Reynolds pretty much hit all the points. Well said. I think this is reversion to the original zoning. While I'm not massively enthusiastic about changing zoning as frequently as has been changed on this parcel, I am not willing to use that as a reason not to move forward with the applicant's request. And correspondingly, I find that the evidence, based on the evidence presented, the applicant is met his requirements under the comprehensive plan and the downtown neighborhood plan, and I'll support the amendment accordingly.
David?
Yeah, I guess I have some ambivalence about this change, for some of the same reasons already stated. I think, the benefit to this over the PDO is we'll have a little bit larger setback than we did before. I still struggle with the decreasing setbacks that we seem to have. But, given the surrounding uses, you've got office across the street, next door, there's at least a 4-family behind. As long as the design looks good as we go through the SDP process, I know that's not part of our purview, but, I don't have a problem with the density. I think we definitely need more housing downtown, and I like the idea, I guess, of having more, I don't know what the word is, but going back to the original zoning for that area versus having a bunch of PDOs. I just have never liked that. And I'm happy we're not doing more of them, so thanks.
First, Mr. Chair, a point of order here. I just want to make sure our motion is valid, because as I read the motion, the 5546 to 56 is not the same address as on the...
You're right. 48, 5546 to 48. You're correct.
Do we need to amend that to...
I think it would be a friendly...
Just a friendly.
Would you...
Yeah, quite so.
Okay.
Does that satisfy you?
Second, yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I just want to make a few comments. First, what I don't like about the application is, as others suggested, the fact of using rezoning as a tool to kind of go back and fit it to development. Zoning is used as sort of a deliberative tool to keep and preserve the character of the neighborhood. So the fact that this was rezoned twice in a few years kind of rubs me the wrong way. On the other hand, what I like about this is three things. One, it does go back to the underlying zoning, which I think is appropriate and consistent with what the folks who live and work in Littleton want to see in this area. Second, the tighter setbacks don't bother me, the reduction of setbacks. In a walkable downtown area, it's been demonstrated that tighter setbacks, especially around the 10-foot setback area, is just about ideal to create sort of the right scale for a downtown neighborhood. And because there's no driveways on this frontage, 10 feet is plenty adequate. Alley-loaded product facing the street is very desirable. And third, I do agree with the, consistent with the CA zoning, that a slightly higher density is appropriate here and more affordable. And I think one of the challenges with the existing townhomes next door is they're not really affordable for all of us. I've looked at them; they're fairly expensive, and there's a diversity of housing needs in the downtown area that this would better support. So I'd be in support of this.
Agree with many of the comments that I've heard tonight from Commissioner Reynolds, Stallman, and Coronado. I do support it reverting back to CA zoning as well. I'm curious to see how the layout will change based on Chair Rudnicki's comment about the location of the exterior wall to the property line. Good catch. So there may still be some tweaking and even just some more sort of mass reduction potentially to the plan and to the building mass. So I'll be supporting it.
Okay. For me, this is the third time we've looked at this property, rezone, finish issues, and now a rezone back to CA. It's the only way to say it is a gift that keeps on giving. It has rubbed me the wrong way as it has you. With that said, reverting back to CA, we get more open space the 20% open space plus the, instead of a big fat garage that we have to the south, we've got driveways, and which also adds to the open space, even though it's not considered open space. I would disagree with that the standards, the old standards and guidelines are better than the standards now in place today. The guidelines are gone. They were pretty much completely ignored by developers. Now that is not an option. This project has earned my support. Any other comments? Time to vote on the motion.
The vote is 6 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Okay, thank you. Good luck. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break. I don't know how much time the second item will come, so take a 5-minute break and quick break and come back, and then we'll recess for the study session.
Okay.
Beloved Salt Shaker. let's continue. Second item, public hearing, is PC Resolution 08, 2019, an amendment to Littleton City Code Title 10, Chapter 1 and 7, regarding site development plans. We have no site to visit, so we don't have to do that drill. Staff presentation.
You.
Works better than that. It smells good.
Okay. Good evening, Chairman Rudnicki and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Mike Sutherland. I'm the Deputy Director of Community Development. Let's see, do we have the presentation on the screen? There we go. Thank you. So tonight we've got a site development plan proposed code amendment, which would change the Title 10, Chapter 7 of the Littleton City Code regarding site development plans. We had a joint study session with Planning Commission and City Council on January 22nd, 2019. The object of the proposed code amendment was to basically create two tiers of site development plans and a differing amendment process for each tier. So the site development plan would be changed into a major site. Right now we have one type of site development plan. It's all administratively approved. Under the proposed code amendment, we'd have a major site development plan and a minor site development plan. Tonight we're at the Planning Commission meeting and the projected City Council first reading is May 7th. Tentative, and second reading is May 21st, tentative. So as I was saying before, there's currently one type of site development plan, and the purpose of this amendment was to have differing amendment or appeals processes for large site development plans versus small site development plans. And for the appeals, so they would still be processed administratively, but for appeals, Planning Commission would have the final say. Major site development plans, there's a definition for them in the proposed code. Any industrial development that's greater than 10,000 square feet, any multifamily development that's greater than 8 units, any commercial development greater than 30,000 square feet, and any development whatsoever on property that's over 10 acres. For the minor site development plans, anything that didn't qualify as a major, the applicant would have the ability to appeal staff's most likely denial. I can't foresee any circumstance where an applicant would appeal our approval. But you never know. I guess it's possible. And then that's done within, currently that's set up to, that appeals process is set up for within 10 days of our decision. So the big change here would be for the major site development plans, some of these more significant developments in the city. The applicant would still have the ability to appeal a denial. However, the big change is that property owners within 300 feet would have the ability to appeal either approval or denial. Again, it seems like denials would be a rare thing for a neighboring property owner to appeal, but most likely they would be appealing approvals of these more significant development projects. The planning commission, if either a major or a minor were appealed, it would come before this body. The decision would be an administrative decision, which would be based on code criteria, not a quasi-judicial. So we wouldn't open up the entire site development plan for for a discussion at the Planning Commission, but it would be limited to the items that are listed specifically in the code amendment. And the Planning Commission would have the final decision. Any appeals beyond the Planning Commission's decision would go through the court system, through the Colorado Revised Statutes Rule 106. And this would establish those review criteria that I mentioned earlier. This code amendment would establish those, and any appeals would have to be based on those criteria. For larger projects with a greater community impact, the proposed amendment would provide additional ability to appeal staff decisions, and staff would recommend approval of this amendment. We did, and let me throw in a note here to apologize to the Planning Commission. We've been trying out a new process of gathering opinions on these proposed code amendments. And so we sent you a packet this afternoon that had a summary of the 16 comments we received. We were really encouraged by the number of comments we received through our poll. And then we also received, I believe, 4 emails. And we forwarded those on to you. We tried to send those at noon today. But when we wrote this, we didn't have anything to send to you previously, and it all kind of came in over the weekend. So it's a little bit much to digest, and just to try and help there, we did receive those 16 people took the poll and made comments. I think the majority of the comments were concerned about the radius of people who were able to appeal. Most folks thought that the folks who made comments about this thought that the 300 feet wasn't enough for some of these larger projects. And I will note that our standard notification requirement for all public hearings is 750 feet from the property boundary. So this would be a little bit tighter. It would be neighboring property owners within 300 feet, but that's the standard public notification for, if we were going to do a rezone. The last case you heard, there was a 750-foot notification boundary surrounding there. In conclusion, staff's recommending approval of this. One more thing. We did have one person who made comments on a Word document, and the comments were on the side, and she made red lines too, but the red lines showed up in your packet and on the printed version. I understand the comments on the side did not show up in the versions you have that were sent to your iPads. So we tried to convert those to Word, but it didn't work very well. The nature of the comments that she gave were fairly administrative. I think we can address a lot of those, but what was shown on the side comments did not appear in what you received this afternoon. So I apologize for that, but I think we can address some of those. A lot of them were fairly administrative in nature and didn't deal with some of the meat of the amendment, I guess. So in conclusion, staff is requesting a recommendation of approval from the Planning Commission to the City Council for the proposed amendments to Littleton City Code Title 10, Chapters 1 and 7. 1 is the definitions, and 7 is the site development plans section. And your options tonight are to recommend a recommendation of approval with conditions, recommendation of a denial, or a continuance to a date certain. And that concludes the staff presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for staff? We'll start down here this time. Thanks for looking over.
Can I add one thing before we start?
Speak right into the microphone.
Right. So, Chairman McKinney, you had made the comment of you didn't get a whole lot of time to look at these survey comments. And that is something moving forward when we have this community engagement process, we will cut the time off prior to our packet going out. So that's kind of why you got it so late in the game, is that we did have a published cutoff date of today, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Actually, the comments are open all the way through the first reading of council, but we're still kind of working on this process and realize that we gave you a lot of comments very late. So that we will try and improve in the future.
Yeah, I could see, it's good for us to get the basic packet like by Thursday, so we have that extra day, and maybe the comments could come in Friday or even Saturday or something, but we still get them with plenty of time to look at it. We all have jobs, and some of us didn't have a chance to look at it at all except for our 5-minute break.
Yeah, absolutely, and we will try and improve that in the future.
Okay, sure, fine. Appreciate that. Dan, go ahead.
Question. So looking at site development plan major definition, item 2, multifamily. What was the magic behind 8 dwelling units for multifamily? I mean, some other municipalities that I've done work in, they basically don't. It's like if you have multifamily, it's a major site plan development. Why 8?
So there's no particular magic to the number 8 there, Commissioner Miller. I think the last case that you reviewed tonight was a development that had 4, or it possibly had 4. I think with 8, particularly in the downtown area, you're getting more to the maximum allowed in that area. I think that's how we determine that 8 might be a better number than, let's say, 2 or 3 or 4 to protect the property owner's ability to do an allowed use, but also walk that fine line where if they're maximizing the land there, where 8 is a little bit closer. But certainly the Planning Commission is welcome to recommend whatever they think is appropriate there as well.
All right, I'm going to jump down to the site development plan. This is on page 2. The submittal requirements, I don't know, they seem pretty lean compared to, say, other Denver, Westminster, Fort Collins. Just how did those come up? And I guess the other thing that was sort of a little inconsistent to me was, so we have items A through I as being submittal requirements, but then down at, let me get down here. Approval of, I'm looking now on page 4, item C, approval of STP requires that the plan shall meet all of the following criteria. So there's just some inconsistencies on what is listed here. I think there's stuff about architecture, building materials, colors, massing, that is not being asked for in the STP submittal. Or STP submittal. It seems like it's a very light amount of submittal requirements, I guess, is what I'm saying.
I appreciate that, Commissioner Miller. And in response, so the submittal requirements you pointed out are very basic. We do have operational standards as well that give a little bit more flesh to those submittal requirements and a little bit more standardization. They're not, the way Littleton has operated for years is we've got some fairly basic application requirements, and I can see Chairman Rudnicki is smiling at me. That's because he is well aware of our operational standards.
These are about this thick. Yes.
Yeah, we do have some fairly rigorous operational standards. This is the minimum application requirements. And then the other portion you listed was the review criteria, which gives both staff and Planning Commission a fairly broad scope of items to look at when reviewing these site development plans. And I think those two are in good proportions. So we've got some somewhat limited minimum application requirements, but then operation standards that really fill in what we need to see. And then you've got some fairly broad review criteria, which I think is very appropriate.
So I just kind of looked at it through the lens of if I was doing a project, like, okay, what do I need to get you? And so I see items A through I, and then you're talking about operating standards. Maybe there's just a reference to that, like in that application requirements, it says the SCP application must meet the submission requirements stated in this chapter and in the operating standards, which can be found in, give me a link to that so I can go find it, because it sounds like it's sort of difficult to navigate.
And we do mention the operating standards there, but
where do I find them?
Yeah, right. So those are on the website, but
okay.
I apologize about the interruption.
Okay. Let's see what else here. Then I'm also looking at item C on page 4. The list of the following criteria, 1 through 7. Item 3 shall comply with any standards adopted by the Planning Commission. Where would I find those? You don't have to answer it, but it's just, I would be curious if that should be referenced somewhere, if there's a link to what the latest adopted standards are. Item 5, it is compatible with adjacent development to the subject property based on the factors identified in subsection 8. I'm not sure what subsection 8 is. Following me?
Yep.
Okay.
Can you answer where 8 is? Would you mind?
Oh, no, it's fine.
Hit me.
Yeah.
C8.
Yeah, I can, we did not include the entire, so when I started on these things, I think there were 35 pages of amendments. So we got it down to 10, which I thought was a good start. But we may not have listed all of the code sections that weren't subject to an amendment. And so I can pull up section 8. Let's see. And it's possible it could be an oversight on my part. But let's see, section 8. All right, so that's 10.7.3. I think that's an oversight on my part. I will correct that.
I know the preliminary project plan, it sounds like that's going to eventually be codified. Will that be referenced? I'm just kind of going back to understanding how, if I were to wanted to do a development, what my steps are. Because it looks like we're deleting a concept plan, but we still can do a P3. Where would that be picked up?
So the original idea of the concept plan was codified and I think generally replaced by the pre-application meeting. So now the pre-application meeting is required. We never went back at that time and got rid of the concept plan. Now's our opportunity to do that. But the idea of the pre-application meeting should replace the concept plan. The P4 is a different process that's optional and is codified and would not be affected by any of the proposed amendments. However, it's not really available to site development plans at this time. It's mainly, the P4 process is mainly for rezonings and plan development districts. Those are the two that qualify for that P4. And the preliminary plan project, the P4, preliminary plan project process, I think it is. We got a lot of those. But basically that concept plan was intended to be replaced by the pre-application meeting. And I think we've successfully done that. Last year we had one application for a concept plan that we pleaded the applicant not to do, but they went ahead and paid for it, and we did kind of a one review that was non-binding. It was a strange process, but we've tried to replace that. And this would kind of get rid of that option.
Thank you. That is all that I have right now.
Okay, great.
So the sketch plan 10-7-6, that doesn't replace the concept plan, then that's something different, right, for minor subdivision?
Correct. So the site development plan right now is a fairly intensive process, and there are some developments that are very minor in nature, which may not qualify as site development plans, but we'd like to see the idea is to have a brief and fairly inexpensive review process for changes to a site that just deal with parking or landscaping or very minor things like that. And the idea there is the sketch plan.
And that would be shared with staff through a pre-application type meeting then, or how?
Yes, you can do pre-application meetings for sketch plans, and sketch plans can be appealed. The decision on those could be appealed.
Okay.
But they wouldn't qualify as a major. They would be appealed as a minor. Pretty much denials. And we had an example of that, I believe late last year, which was the other side of the duplex that we just talked about.
Okay.
That was done as a sketch plan. We did it quickly. We got it to you, and you made a decision on it.
Okay, and then focusing on the sketch plan section, which is the last paragraph here, I notice design guidelines is referred to in here, and I think we changed to design standards. Do we still have, is design guidelines still an appropriate thing, or are we mixing terms? It's in under A, the last sentence, evaluate a proposal in compliance with design guidelines, drainage criteria, and landscapes criteria. There may still be design guidelines with a given PDO or...
Yeah, that's possible that there are design guidelines both with a plan development or a plan development overlay. We did not make any, we tried to stick fairly closely to, let's get a major site development plan and a minor site development plan and the appeals process. As you may know, we have a more intensive code update plan for 2020, and all of this could change a little bit, but the idea here was to do the minimum possible, or the minimum practical to get a major and a minor with the different appeals processes. So we tried not to touch all of the sections of the site development plan as much as we could.
Okay. And one last question. I'm looking for a yes or no answer.
Thank
you. Since we just got a lot of this material and are still kind of digesting it, is there any urgency to the dates based on pending applications that are coming in that you want to get this completed if we were to delay it for 2 weeks?
No. There is no urgency to the dates.
Okay,
You're
thank you.
Within your rights to do whatever you'd like.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to understand the 300 versus 750 foot issue, I guess. So, because the 750 foot, that's a notification distance, and this is for appeals. Do you notify, are we still notifying people with 750 feet?
Only if there is a public hearing is where that 750-foot notification boundary would be required. So the way this is set up, it would not be a public hearing. It'd be an administrative review by the Planning Commission to decide specific factors about the appeal. Mm-hmm. But yes, with a rezoning case or anything that had a public hearing, that's the usual requirement is 750 feet from the property boundary.
Okay, and what's the reason for tightening it up, just to limit it to mostly adjacent property owners?
Yes, the directly affected was the idea.
Okay.
I think in some of the comments you received, one person suggested a quarter mile. That could be tough to administer. But I don't think we'd recommend going beyond the 750 feet. Mm-hmm. But the idea with the 300 was our normal notification boundary for public hearings is a specific number, and this would be a little bit tighter.
Yeah, and that's specifically to allow somebody to appeal the decision?
Yes, to appeal most likely an approval of a site development plan.
Yeah, as I think you said before. So if I look at the Enser property, which maybe it's not a good example because they're probably going to go for some rezonings, but the difference between at 300 feet, I think the only adjacent property owner is going to be to the south, that Equine Center, I guess.
To the north, then?
To the north is RTD.
Yep.
To the west is South Suburban. To the east is the railroad tracks. If we increase it to 750, you've got about 50 homeowners to the east and apartment owners to the east. But without the 300 level, you basically just have one commenter. But that's just for an appeal. I mean, for all the public hearings that I'm sure we'll have on that, there'll be plenty of opportunity for people to speak, I suppose. Okay, that was really my only issue.
Jason?
I'll ask a clarification on the 300 feet. Does that include right-of-way, or do you skip over right-of-way? So the example, for example, on the Enser property, if you skip over right-of-way when you start counting, you would easily capture many of the residents across Santa Fe.
The way I read the current amendment is that it's a 300-foot bubble, and any property owner within that 300 feet, exclusive of right-of-way or easements, has the ability to appeal. So it doesn't, as you said, for clarification, it doesn't skip over right-of-way. It's 300 feet from the property boundary.
From the parcel boundary.
Yeah, and if it connects with anyone's, if it touches a property within 300 feet, that person has the ability to appeal or standing to appeal.
What is the current notification requirement on a site development plan?
The current notification requirement, there is no notification requirement. So it's all administrative, and there is no notification requirement.
Okay, and currently the only entity with the standing to appeal is the applicant.
That is correct.
Okay, so another question concerns the notification for major projects to nearby property owners. Could you talk a little bit about how that might work in terms of making sure they receive notice in a timely manner and have enough time to consider whether they want to object or not?
Certainly. The way that it's set up now, the appeal period is 10 days from the date of the decision. It's the responsibility of the applicant to notify all property owners within 300 feet of the property and to provide the city with evidence that they have notified them of the decision date. They've got 10 days to make an appeal based on the review criteria.
Okay, so one potential concern is if the director approves it, the applicant waits 5 days and then sends the letter out. It's postmarked 5 days after the approval, but the clock has potentially already started ticking for the appeal.
We'd have to work hand in hand with the applicant on that issue to make sure that we notified the applicant of the date that it would be approved and that they had the notices out in a timely manner, such as either before that approval date has come or that date they have mailed out. But we'd have to work fairly closely with the applicants on that.
And then I had a question about the construction having to be complete within the development plan area within 3 years. I'm just wondering if a phasing plan could extend that longer, or could an applicant who's actively under construction sort of keep the building permits going beyond that 3-year time limit?
My interpretation of that section is that if you have a site development plan approved, let's say it's for 3 buildings, you build the first one right away, and then the economy changes, and you've got a building permit issued, you've got your certificate of occupancy, but you don't have the other 2 buildings. At that point, I think, if you've got all the architecture that's been approved with the site development plan and you've got the specific layout, you're vested and you've got the ability to build the other 2 buildings at any time, even after the expiration of 3, if it's 5 years. However, in practice, that's how I would interpret that. In practice, the more time elapses between the approval and the construction, the less likely is somebody wants to build the building that was planned 10 years ago. Most likely the market changes, everything changes, and they want to come back in with some new plan for a building like that. But I would see that as long as they have a building that's been approved and built, and the phases need to be built, and those phases are sufficiently approved, they've got the ability to construct that. Now, the trickier case there is a building where they get a building permit and 3 years goes by and they haven't completed it.
I think there's a single-family home example that wouldn't be covered by these regulations, though.
Right. That would be a trickier example.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I had.
I was going to just compliment staff on your efforts to try to implement a new process in terms of communicating citizen comments to the commission. I think that's great. Understand it'll take a little bit of time to refine, but, well done in the effort.
We were very pleased with the response, and I appreciate your noticing that, but we've got a little ways to go to work out the kinks.
Sure. Yeah, that's
especially for your benefit.
Understand, but, good effort in terms of taking stepping out of the comfort zone kind of thing. Couple things. One of the emails that came in from a fellow named John Spencer, he makes the point that with respect to the 300 feet, in his opinion, overreaching, this is overreaching and diminishes the rights of property owners to develop what may be permitted by the zoning code and gives rights to someone a distance away. It's not an unfair comment, but I want to be very clear on one thing you said at the outset. This doesn't give rights to people to tell the developer what they can, or the property owner, what they can do with their property, which is pretty much sacrosanct. What it does do is it sets up an arrangement where there's an appeal based upon strictly code-related items. If somebody didn't do something in conjunction with the code, then an applicant more broadly, a neighbor or someone affected by it could raise that issue, but it doesn't turn it into a full-on quasi-judicial rehearing. So I want to just clarify that with you. That's what I heard. Is that accurate?
I completely agree with your statement, Commissioner Stallman. I think that's accurate. I think there's a limited, the criteria of approval is fairly broad, and anybody could appeal those criteria. But it shouldn't be a matter of how the code is met or the use of the property or things like that that are established by the zoning district. So I completely agree with your assessment.
Okay, and as such, I think it's...
Commissioner, so if I could add, I'm going to go full geek lawyer now. The appeal under this provision or this proposal would be under Rule 106A2, which would then be to a governmental body that they didn't follow proper procedures or proper criteria. If it were appeal under of a quasi-judicial decision, it would be under Rule 106A4, which is there substantial evidence in the record to support the decision. We're not allowing that because there would not be a quasi-judicial hearing. The question would be, had appropriate criteria been applied under Rule 106A2, which the court is not allowed to substitute its opinion for the opinion of the commission. It is just verifying that the appropriate criteria have been applied.
Good. No, thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. And I think that's really important. I think it does provide an element of balance with respect to people broadly, citizens broadly within the community who may have concern, but on the other hand, it does not obviate the rights of the property owner to do what the zoning code allows. It just keeps everybody, on a level playing field at that point. So I think that's good. The last thing I was going to mention, and the comment about the timing of this, on the early on you had, I think the second slide in there has the process timeline. There you go. It's coming to us tonight, and then the first reading and the second reading for council are going to be as indicated. I would caution that we already know council's got a very full agenda with respect to Envision and comprehensive plan and transportation master plan and stuff. And personally, I'd like to stay on the timeline we're on. I mean, ultimately, if we pass something or don't, we can forward a recommendation, but I think there need to be punctual in terms of keeping all the balls in the air is an important one. And if this is what the schedule is timed out to be, I think we've got enough information here to make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll disagree on the timeline. If we feel that this needs some massaging, which I think it needs, the timeline can be changed and should be. If we deem that there's a sufficient amount of information needs to be added or tweaked from the document. Let's see. It was very good asking the questions about what can be discussed during the hearing. I could see a situation where either the property owner or the or citizen would challenge a zoning interpretation. You said, the property owner says, well, you misinterpreted it, you, sir. Homeowner says the same thing next door, or a business owner next door says the same thing. You only can strictly say, you're not going to discuss somebody's reasoning would be, I just don't like it, the code should change. You're not judging that, that's not part of our hearing. It would be, did you strictly interpret the code properly for that particular item, whether it be setbacks, heights, whatever, name it. So, that's fine. I don't need a response there. Administrative review versus quasi-judicial, I understand that more. I didn't understand it when I walked in. A typical public hearing, we have public input, 3 minutes to speak, et cetera. Is that part of this process?
So you could certainly have the appellant speak, but I don't think it would be, and I looked to Paul here, but I don't think you necessarily need to take public testimony unless you wanted to.
I agree.
Yeah, I think you're correct.
It's an administrative decision, so you wouldn't need public testimony on that.
So it would be the applicant and the person that files whoever files the contest the appeal.
Yes,
they will be the speakers.
The appellant.
And we judge accordingly,
right,
with information from you as well. Okay.
Certainly, the public would have an opportunity to speak during public comments before the general business item if there were an appeal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, just a general public. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt your.
No, that's perfect.
That
does give them the opportunity. It's just in a different portion of our meetings. You set up the 750. Let's say the 750 foot notification. But then you shrunk it down to 300. Other people have mentioned the same thing. Why not just stay with the 750? Why shrink it down?
It's a tight balance between. I think one of the people who commented said, "Well, it should be a quarter mile." You know, if you open the barn doors too wide, I'm worried about what we'd get as far as appeals. So, but it's up to the Planning Commission on what to recommend. We had, as staff, we had kind of started even in the study session of, all right, well, we're used to 750 feet for a notification boundary. What's a little bit less that it might tighten the sphere of influence of a person who might appeal. But certainly the commission could recommend whatever distance they felt were appropriate.
Or somebody mentioned does the right-of-way, let's say there's a particular development on Bellevue, notification is sent out, but you got a 60-foot right-of-way on Bellevue, that's subtract that from the 300 feet and sure does lighten the load as far as giving the public opportunity to contest.
Yeah, and we don't mean to make it too restrictive. We thought maybe 300 feet would cover most roads.
You mentioned the barn door being too open. Obviously, the barn door could be a little too tight.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Right.
I could see a risk to developers who dispute some of the decisions of staff on the site development plan. looks like the wording, the PC could deny the entire site development plan, or is it just the contested items?
So upon appeal, the Planning Commission could make a ruling based on the review criteria. So, yes, the answer is you could deny the entire site development plan based on one of those review criteria.
So if you're a property owner coming in and you're contesting two items, we could deny the whole thing rather than just disputing the two items.
That's correct. That's my understanding.
Okay.
Paul, is that?
At least that's the way it's worded. Is that your intention?
I think that falls under the category, careful what you ask for, you might just get it, right? If you're disputing a couple of things that the staff says and file an appeal, I mean, I think you've kind of opened yourself up to whatever the Planning Commission wants to review. I mean, if they can live with those criteria, they might just say no appeal.
Is that an inadvertent item, or was that your intent?
That was the intent.
Okay, leave it at that. I'm not adverse to hard work. I've calculated I've been over 500 meetings as a planning commissioner over the years. But it's going to put an increased load on the planning commission. How many projects would you say last year would fall under the major site development plan criteria? Give me a number, 25, 50?
Oh, no, much less than that. I would say maybe 5.
5?
Yeah, site development plans.
Okay.
Yeah, in that ballpark.
So let's say we pass this, there's potential for, if the numbers still hold up year to year, maybe 5, possibly 5 could come to the planning commission.
Yeah.
Okay. What is you mentioned a fee for filing an appeal, a fee from the applicant and also a fee from a neighbor. What is that fee currently?
Let's look that up. I believe it's $250, but let me find out.
Basically, I wanted to know whether it was $5 or $2,000.
I think it's fairly reasonable, but I thought it was in that range. Let me.
Okay, if that's your general recollection, that's fine for now.
I can. Why don't we go on to the next question, and I'll look it up while we're talking.
I guess I also have a problem with the notification. I could see, the site development plan has been contested by the applicant. He claims his secretary is deer hunting in Wyoming. The notices go out 4 days. It takes 2 days mail delivery. It leaves the neighbors, whether it be businessmen or homeowners, 3 days, 4 days to respond. There's something wrong here. It's got to be tightened up. Either we got to extend the 10 days to 15 days and have proof positive from the applicant that these letters went out.
Yes, thanks, Chairman Rudnicki. We base the 10 days on the current appeal process, and I realize that this is a little bit more sensitive because the applicant's aware instantly. So at the Planning Commission's discretion, they could recommend a longer time frame for that appeal period, and we could certainly, the intent of the 10-day appeal period was to give neighboring property owners some time, but not extend it beyond a reasonable time. But we're open to suggestion anywhere in between.
It has to be reasonable time, plus it has to be proof positive that it went out in a timely manner, not, as Jason was saying, it takes a few days and, he does it on purpose. It could
We'd have to work very carefully with the applicant to make sure that is fair.
The other thing you could do is make it 10 days of the postmark on the notice. And then
yes, that's an
if somebody
easy way
comes
around.
in and they produce the letter that shows the postmark is someday they got 10 days from that, even if the approval date was something else.
Okay, that's not bad. I've seen it, you've seen it, I get something, I never saw it, and it arrived, and it got thrown into the pile of bills, et cetera, anyway, that could happen. That's all the question.
And the answer to your other question is $500 for the appeal.
$500?
Yeah, I was off.
Okay. So there is some skin in the game here on either side.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Open it up to public comment. Pam, you signed up to speak, and being the only other person in the room.
I'm Pam Chadbourne. I live in District 1. So thanks for your good questions. I have some comments. I'm not sure I understood this correctly, but if the pre-application meeting is supposed to replace the concept plan, my problem as a member of the public is that I don't get to go to the pre-application meeting and I have no visibility into it. It is not transparent. Whereas the concept plan gets posted online, and so all of us can see there's some kind of plan out there. I want to make sure that the pre-application meeting does not replace something that is posted online in the project development list or the development list. And I put that number 1. That's vital. The public has to be able to see these kinds of proposals. 300 feet for approval notice is too small, but arguably one size doesn't fit all here. We should see, I'm going to hope that you do delay this and you ask for a couple illustrations for Enser and for Columbine Square. And that's very different than, let's say, where I live, where my neighbor is proposing 19 townhomes. I would be noticed, other people would, probably there should be more, but Columbine Square and Enser are not the same as downtown. That may take some refinement, but not for me to address right now. 8 units for a minor application is, thank you for picking that up, is arbitrary, and I involuntarily said hi at the study session because that's absurd. I'm sorry, but it is not minor to propose that 8 people live next door to you where there might have been 1 or a business. And other municipalities don't do this. Any change or increase in that density, I think neighbors have a right to know. But, okay, maybe 3 or whatever. I'm not sure that there is an objective way to decide, but 8 units is far too many. There is no way that you can say that that's a minor impact on a residential neighbor. And 10 days is too short, and I'm glad you're thinking about addressing that. It's unrealistic. Now, my comment is that how does this apply to the Grove? Would a neighbor have been able to appeal the, I say criminal, notice of decision issued by the city to violate 12 or 14 items of our zoning code by a proclamation that I interpret this as compliance? I'd like to understand that. And finally, I'd like to say Kemp is gone, and we should give this more time for our city attorney to look at it. Thanks very much for your concern about this.
Thank you. We'll close the public comment portion of the meeting. Any other further questions of staff?
Yes. So to the points a member of the public just raised about apartment units, so for someone to qualify for one of these, they must have the zoning in place to allow those apartments. In other words, there's no zoning change. This is something that's allowed under current zoning in order to qualify for one of these plans.
That is correct. This would only apply to administrative site development plans, not rezoning projects or things like that.
So today, those would be approved with no notice whatsoever, potentially?
The site development plans, Ms. Chadbourne mentioned our development activity list. and the site development plans are placed on the development activity list and are available to be seen through the website. But they could be approved administratively, and right now, the only person with standing to appeal is the applicant.
Okay, and then the hypothetical on the Grove, if I understand the code right, 300 feet, with maybe a 60-foot right-of-way there adjacent would capture a lot of the houses across the street.
My understanding from the purpose of this, it actually stemmed from the Grove and that approval process. And residents who live nearby were concerned about that approval process and had the idea to maybe take a ballot initiative through. And our city attorney's office at the time said, well, rather than go through a ballot initiative, why don't we try and change the code?
Thank you.
Any other questions? Then we'll entertain a motion.
Would you like, I jotted some notes down as
I'm
we
sorry?
were talking. I jotted some notes down as we were talking. I can attempt to address some of the things that.
Oh, I'm sorry, you
brought
have
up.
more?
Sure. No, to make a motion.
Gets him off the hook, missed motion.
Okay. So I move to approve PC Resolution 08-2019, amending Littleton City Code Title 10, Chapters 1 and 7 regarding site development plans, which forwards a favorable recommendation to City Council with the following conditions. 1, add a new subsection J to Section 10-7-2.B.2, requiring the submittal of any documents required to demonstrate compliance with Littleton's operating standards and the site development plan's approval criteria. 2, for major applications, the final decision date shall be defined as the date the applicant provides certification of mailing to the nearby property owners to the city. 3, for major applications, the appeal period shall be 20 days. And I'll just sort of explain. I was trying to set it so that the clock won't start on the appeal period until the city has proof that the mailing was accomplished. It's a little different from the postmark, and if there's any attorney feedback on the motion, I'd appreciate it. And then the second addresses the timeline on there to increase that to 20 days. I personally experienced an issue where for public notice, the post office sent the notices down to Denver where they sat for a week, and it ended up taking like 12 days for the notice to get to the neighborhood. So.
We have a motion?
Well, second the motion.
Okay.
Offer up one amendment.
Okay, thank you.
In extending the notification range from 300 feet to 600 feet.
I won't consider that one friendly.
It's not unfriendly.
No, it's appreciated
But
feedback.
it would be an amendment
It'd be amendment.
to your motion, yes.
Yep. Any second? I'll second it. We're going to do some amendments here.
Do we have to vote on that amendment?
No, we'll vote on them in reverse order. We'll do the amendments and then we'll get to the main motion. My amendment will be that street right-of-ways will, the 600 feet will be in addition to any street right-of-way.
Excluding.
Okay, I'm sorry, that'd be a better way to put it. Excluding, okay, the 600 feet excludes right-of-ways, street right-of-ways.
And easements.
And easements, thank you. I got that? Want me to repeat that?
Do you want to make it,
Or my shadow could, go ahead.
Please.
Okay.
do you want to make it generic, though, and not say 600 feet in case that amendment fails? Or are you changing it to 600 feet?
It's an amendment, a good point. would you consider to add it to your amendment?
Sure.
But we have a second. I seconded it. I would go along with that.
I'm sorry, what did you decide?
All right, so we've made a friendly amendment to the amendment.
A friendly amendment.
So the friendly amendment is now 600 feet excluding rights of way.
Or easements.
Or easements. Okay.
Correct.
You said it.
And you have seconded that motion with that friendly amendment.
Got it.
All right, so we have
Thank you.
one amendment. We're back to one amendment and the main motion. Any other amendments?
I propose that all multifamily development in any zone having more than 3 dwelling units. My rationale for that is I'm just kind of looking up how incrementally single-family home is 1, duplex is 2. The next level up is a 3-unit development.
Okay, so with that explanation, could you say the amendment
Yeah,
again?
just
State the amendment?
Yeah, that we amend site development plan major definition item 2 that states all multifamily development in any zone having more than 3 dwelling units.
We have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Whew. Any other amendments?
Who seconded, I'm sorry?
I did.
Great.
Thank you.
Craig.
Okay,
So we have to vote on the amendment,
correct.
then
In
another
reverse order.
amendment,
And
then back to the
Yes.
original motion. Okay.
Reverse order.
Yep. Okay, seeing no other amendments, we're voting on
Any discussion?
Dan's amendment. Any discussion? Seeing none? Vote.
Well,
Oh,
I was going to just say that as was indicated, the 3 versus the 8 was reflective of whatever was allowed for in the zoning. So I guess, help me understand why you want to take it all the way down to 3 if.
I think it's more for us to review the plan. I think it doesn't matter what the zoning is. It's more that we would review the site plan if it has more than 3 units.
Only if it's appealed.
Only if it's
Yeah, only
appealed.
if it's appealed, because it's an administrative one regardless.
But it's subject to appeal. The idea that it's subject to appeal would
As a
mean
minor
more
versus a major,
Right.
yeah.
Or would be subject, there'd be more, those applications that would be subject to appeal. More opportunities to review and appeal.
I'm just saying if what constitutes a major site development plan, if it's a 3-unit project, that's a major site development plan. Therefore, we would review it.
no. We would only review it
It's
under appeal.
Yeah, it's still administrative.
Okay.
It's all administrative unless it's appealed by either the applicant or a near resident.
Then I will redact my amendment.
Or we
Withdraw
could
your
vote on
Just
it.
withdraw it, sorry.
Does the second agree to it? Is the second need to No. You're
Have the
pulling it off the
first,
table.
have the second,
Yep.
so
We good on that?
On the motion, there's nothing to vote on.
nothing to vote.
Good. Okay. Good discussion. All right, we're back to,
The 600-foot amendment
yes,
with excluding right-of-way.
yes. And?
Oh,
And easements. Okay.
correct. Yeah.
Any discussion on the First Amendment?
The logic is just in deference to sort of splitting the difference between 300 and 750. 300, I understand what staff was going for, respect that. There wasn't a lot of magic to it. It's 300 times 2 is 600. So logically, let's make it a little bit wider. Seemed reasonable.
I think the word I was looking for before was precedence. 750 has been set up as a precedence. 600 seems reasonable with the, like say, the exclusion of the right-of-way.
Right-of-ways,
And
yeah.
the
Herod,
easements.
Nikki, would you mind restating the motion
Tis
before
motion.
they vote?
Yeah, the motion, the amendment was that we increase the notification range on appeal from 300 feet to 600 feet, excluding rights-of-way and easements.
Thank you.
Okay, we're good?
Just want to make sure I got it right.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, I'll explain why I'm voting against this particular motion. I like half of it. I like the excluding rights of way and easements. 600 feet's an awfully big distance. So as an example, if someone were doing a major plan in the downtown area at the site we were discussing today, 600 feet would capture all of the townhomes west of Prince Street, which seems like an awful lot of notice given the area. One size certainly doesn't fit all, but we are moving from a place where there is no notification currently, and there is no ability for neighbors to intervene in these types of plans. So I think 300 feet is a great place to start with that notification, given that we're starting with 0. So that's...
And I understand your concern about the downtown area, but pretty well any other area of the city that it seems reasonable, the 600. We have the downtown, what do you call it? We call it our moated downtown or our football. It's a pretty small area. The vast majority of the city, the 600 works.
I'd like to add a comment too. I tend to agree with the 300-foot, mainly because I think of a football field length and the likelihood of somebody being impacted by a development is normally dictated by sight distance. If it's in their visual line of sight of something they see, 300 feet to me feels like, that's going to capture, even with right-of-way, is going to capture at least 2 adjacent properties that would be impacted visually by a development that to the extent that they might appeal. So to me, it seems reasonable. Kind of on the fence on the vote. 600 is certainly more conservative, but I think 300 is reasonable.
Of course, we are advisory to council, and they'll make the final decision.
No, so are you saying 300 excluding right-of-way, or just 300?
Well, so the way I worded the initial motion was, it didn't include excluding right-of-way. I think that's a valuable addition after our discussion here, but I just disagree with the 600.
We still have the 600 as the motion. Any other discussion? We have time to vote.
The vote sorry, I wasn't expecting that. The vote is 2 in favor with Commissioner Reynolds, Bolt, Coronado, and Miller voting no. The motion fails 2 to 4.
Okay.
Would someone entertain another motion to exclude rights-of-ways and easements from the 300 feet?
Would move to exclude rights-of-ways and easements from the 300 feet.
Okay, so that is an amendment.
Friendly amendment, right?
I'll second it.
Okay. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, time to vote.
The vote is 5 in favor with Commissioner Bolt voting no. The motion carries 5 to 1.
Seems Jason is getting his way this evening. Okay. Yeah, we're on our main motion. Any discussion on the main motion? On the main motion, we'll go down the line. Want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, I'll support the main motion. I think this is a good direction for, things that have the potential for impacts to neighborhoods. And it does strike a balance between neighborhood protection and the desire on, applicants' parts for certainty, especially in these situations where they already have the zoning in place for the development they're proposing. So that's, I think this is a good step to address some of the issues that the city has grappled with in the past.
I agree. I think it's a good balance.
Yeah, agreed. I think, we're starting from 0, and I know we've had some issues I can think of one in particular that would have benefited from this. And so, yeah, I think it's good to be able to have some neighbors. Yeah, I think the 300 feet strikes a good balance between, allowing some adjacent neighbors to appeal, whereas, but also not giving the city undue burden or even the applicant to get out maybe 50 or 100 notifications in the downtown area, but elsewhere as well, almost everywhere. 600 feet's going to capture, or 300 feet's going to capture at least a couple of adjacent property owners. So, I think somebody who's directly impacted will likely be within that 300-foot range, especially given the exclusion of rights-of-way and easements. So.
Yeah, I would support anything along these lines that make staff's job more effective and efficient, and I applaud you, Mike, and staff for bringing this forward. I think it's an improvement over what we have now. I'm a little disappointed we didn't have more time to review this. I was going to make a motion to delay it for 2 weeks, but I've had a chance to go through these comments now while we're sitting here, and I don't see anything that would lead me to vote against it. So,
I'm going to approve. I think I agree with what I've been hearing this evening, and appreciate the comment about the 300 feet distance. So, thank you.
I will also support this. I think it strikes a nice balance between property rights, development rights, and on major development plans, a citizen's chance to review and to challenge, which currently doesn't exist at all. I think the document probably needs further tweaking. I passed the note to Commissioner Stallman saying we need to pass it to find out what's in it. Nancy Pelosi's line from Obamacare, but I see us. It'd be nice to put it on the agenda to look at it after a year, to tweak it and amend it and firm it up wherever we can, correct some typos or what have you. So, it's a good document. Any other comments?
Just to express appreciation for staff doing this online form. I think that was an effective way to gather information. I did read all the 48 pages while I was bolting down my dinner this evening. It did create a bit of a time crunch, but I appreciated receiving it.
A difficult and complicated item, and did a nice job in presenting. Okay, time to vote.
The vote is 6 in favor. The motion carries unanimously.
Okay. Thank you. Comments from staff? Any comments?
I would.
Yeah, speak directly into that.
I would just like to thank Mike for taking the time to get the site development plan amendments to the point that it was at. That was a lot of his doing to get it to this point that we brought it to you this evening. And other staff members that were involved in putting that survey together. So that is a format that we will be using moving forward. So, and then we also have study session on Envision Littleton. If you still want to do that, I will leave that up to you.
How long do you think that will take?
However long you want it to take. It's just more for KK, for Gary is available for any comments. If you all have had the chance to look at your packets for tomorrow night, it's really to ask. Let's
give it a shot and try to make it quick. And we've often gone past 10 o'clock in the past. That we can. I think we're all still fresh, correct, Commissioner Bolt?
Don't ask me.
Don't. He's been elbowing me for the last half hour, but
I can go get the snack bin if that helps.
Yeah, that would help.
Okay.
I do have two comments. Tomorrow night's meeting with council, a study session. We got more material. If you're like me, I spent most of my weekend and a lot of today looking over tonight's agenda. I'll have to find some time tomorrow to see what we're supposed to talk about tomorrow night. Also, if you get a chance, the Envision lecture series, we had what was it, last Friday, I think it was? Last Friday. Darren Atterbury, city manager, Fort Collins, spoke, and it was quite challenging and very, very well done. Gave me a lot to think about as far as us proceeding with our city's comp plan. Not that we want to duplicate the template or any template, but a template from Fort Collins. Littleton is Littleton. But there's a lot of really good information. So it's on tape if you get a chance to go online and see it. Strongly suggest you doing it. We were there. It was very, very well done. With that said, any other comments from commissioners? Okay, we'll do another 5-minute adjournment, a quick one, and we'll we'll reconvene in the conference room.
That'll give you a chance to clear the pepper out.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Meeting adjourned with the exalted pepper.
Good evening and welcome. You're all still energetic, right?
You are who?
So I'm Kathleen Osher, Envision Littleton manager. So we have Gary Mitchell with the Kendon Keys collaborative team on the phone. He is on mute until you hit that button in front of you. And it is best and easiest to speak to those pucks for questions and conversations. So Gary, we just unmuted you, so I just introduced you. And we're here this evening. We've tried to make this room much, much smaller, and I've shared that the pucks that we have are the easiest way to be heard, because I sound a little bit muffled, I'll bet. So Mark, you might want to just welcome Gary, because...
Welcome, Gary.
Good evening, good evening.
There we go. It is. Oh.
He's super clear, we may not be.
Well, thanks for working late tonight. We are too, so.
Absolutely.
Okay. Go ahead and start. What do you want to do here?
Yeah, so tomorrow evening, I'm going to come over here just so Gary can stay in line with us too. You're good.
Gary,
you're
you're in town tomorrow, is that correct?
Absolutely, yes.
And then you'll stay through the Citizens Committee the next day?
Yes, we're there Thursday.
Tuesday, okay, all right, great.
And so tomorrow evening is a very structured presentation. We'll kind of guide you through all of the documents and handouts. And we'll also have a piece on the transportation master plan as well. So this evening we've designed as much more informal an opportunity to have some conversation with Gary about the new concept of borrowed space that has been introduced. Some of that work, continuing work on future land use community character. You'll see some of that consolidation that we talked about that we were suspecting was coming our way at your last study session. And then the third piece to that is areas for discussion and a handout and support document to start to have a conversation about defining downtown. And so those are kind of the pieces and how the presentation will be structured, but really this is very informal. So I know we've heard a lot of confusion and comments about this new concept of borrowed space. So I don't know if you've had any questions about that, but that may be one place to start.
Well, I've read their book, so I'm beginning to understand what borrowed space means, so I understand the concept. Just looking at the borrowed space map, so I was just intrigued to see how you identified what is borrowed space. I noticed some areas around, say, my neighborhood, which I know people would love to think is going to be borrowed space long-term, but is probably developable land. I know it's developable land, but is that, so if we have, what you've identified as borrowed space, are we saying that there's a push to keep it that way as open space, or is it, or could it be developed?
Yeah, that's why in the material we distinguish between public and private, and it's really to emphasize the public. And really, the point of that as well, that material and map, was to tie back to the vision phase, and how extensively people talk about bringing open space in Littleton, and it's weaved into the community. So that map is intended to illustrate that. So especially the public open space is certainly intended for the long term. The private is just recognizing that that's usually temporary, but in the meantime, that point about a sense of loss, and you see that in your individual film cases and development plans that come before you hear some of that concern.
I guess not to quibble over semantics, but borrowed versus shared. I mean, I get shared space is something that people can, take, like, you got a map here, you've got a picture of Kettering Park, and it says, Kettering Park, space at Kettering Park that is borrowed by residents of adjacent homes. I think I understand what you're trying to convey there, but it's in your parlance, it's borrowed by way more than people in adjacent homes. There's apartments, there's people that bike in and out of there, there's people that you know, walk it from, I don't know, a mile away. And I go over and run, and it probably takes me, I don't know if I'd be considered adjacent. Our neighborhood is in the vicinity of Kettering, but it's, you know, it's probably a half mile to get there. I don't know the way the roads are configured, so forth and so on. I'm not trying to get too into the weeds, but it just borrowed, I don't know, it strikes me as a bit more provocative than maybe we're trying to go for. If it's an industry phrase that you guys are very comfortable with and has specific meaning, and we can go beyond, you know, first impressions kind of thing, fine. I'm not hung up on it, but it just strikes me as sort of a word that, you know, borrowing it means I'm borrowing my neighbor's lawnmower and I'm not going to give it back.
That's an interesting analogy, because you made the distinction yourself that it's the adjacency, that's the point of the borrow space concept. It is the folks that are directly adjacent that get the benefit of that open space versus the people that come to it from elsewhere and share that space in a public space. So it's I know what you mean about semantics, but that's really the key point about that concept, is how people that live right next to the open space absolutely value it and take ownership of it, literally. So yeah, and so not giving the lawnmower back, that's the issue that you can see in your development. Is some people don't want to give it back. They take ownership in it, even though they don't own it.
Okay, no, I understand. Yeah, that you're not wrong in that regard. I know there's a parcel, corresponding parcel that's actually, I think, private property on Bowles Avenue.
Yeah, that's my, yeah.
The waterside?
That's been looked at many times.
Yeah, years ago, Richmond was gonna put homes in there, and people
2 stories tight.
went apoplectic. Yeah, no, you're right. They think that's...
Eventually it'll be developed.
You know, and so many of the things that we talk about in Littleton, you know, in many communities that are still growing, there's lots of room to grow, that's where it's more of an issue. It's bringing to people's attention that these are potential parklands or open space reserves, and there's choices to make before private development, you know, proceeds and takes up so much of that area. So in Littleton's case, the die is pretty well set, but it's still interesting to see, you know, people value that so much when it is nearby and adjacent.
Yeah, and Gary, I think one of the important distinctions for me was how it is a visual element, right? Like it is visual amenity as opposed to being accessible. You know, because in the case of private property, it would be trespassing.
In the presentation with council also is, you know, I talked about last month 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional ways of looking at space, and so we kind of look at this is where architecture, landscape architecture, urban planning all come together, that we're thinking about space, and the urban planners are the ones that try and think about the whole enchilada versus individual sites. So yeah, we're looking across the property line saying, absolutely, that's our experience, is people absolutely take ownership in open space that's next door. Definitely if it's public, if it's private, they want it, and they hurt when they lose it.
Well, I've always stated never be the property owner of the last piece of undeveloped property in any neighborhood. Because it belongs to everybody. They think it's the park, take their dogs out, and they'll fight tooth and nail to keep it, even though it's a piece of private property. So
But as I say, as the thing steps out to mind is the public open space.
Yeah.
And that map just reinforces so much of what we heard during the vision phase.
How does Littleton rate in regards to percentage of borrowed space compared to other cities similar size?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
How does our percentage of open space rate compared to other cities that are similar size? We have a higher level of borrowed space, or average, low?
Well, let me put it this way. It's high to begin with. That's the quick answer. When we were writing the first draft of the vision statement, we had a reference to fingers of green, and we were asked to take that out. This map shows those fingers of green, and that was the point, is that whether there's greenways, the Highline Trail, there's just green within various neighborhoods. And in other cities, more of that is sometimes clustered in one big location, one big regional park or preserved area. To me, it's just much more integrated into the community a little bit.
I like the way the map reads in terms of identifying those fingers of green, as you call it. It's very simple and bold. Can you hear me okay, Gary?
Yes, and we even had some discussion with staff that, because somebody mentioned making those, closing the shapes, making them polygons in GIS language. The point is their edges, and that's why it's all lines. It's those property line edges.
I was wondering why you excluded the schools.
I don't have the map in front of me. Let me look it up.
I'm looking at like Heritage High School, Euclid Middle School.
Even ACC's West Lawn.
Right, yeah. I mean, those are very large open spaces that feel public, even though they're sort of quasi-public.
Well, maybe, I mean, ACC, there's not really any adjacent, as far as borrowed visual space.
There could be.
Goddard, there is. Yeah, Heritage, there certainly is.
East Elementary, though, every school.
I mean, was that a deliberate decision to not include schools?
Not so much, maybe a little bit on the south side, but.
Yeah, that's a good point. We could add those in some locations, but we tend to focus on park space more. And actually bringing that up on the future land use map that we'll be presenting tomorrow night, the start of it, the Heritage High School campus is a good example where we showed the western side where there's the athletic fields and more of the open space on the campus. That's more in keeping with the suburban residential around there. But on the east side is where all the parking is, so that's more the auto urban character. And so, it's got a mix of things going on that campus. But yeah, very definitely, there's various campuses around the city that definitely have green space.
So you could show the portion of the school that's athletic fields and not highlight the parking areas of that particular school.
Yeah, I like that.
The schools are so integral to our community, and all our sports that our kids do are on school fields, and it always feels like it's part of the park, and then, there's a building there, but it's a school and a park.
Is there any other borrowed space that we haven't thought of? We got schools, we've got the parks, gulches, et cetera. Is there anything else?
Well, I wonder how it applies to the large lot, sort of rural character, like in Shady Croft, Rangeview area, where borrowed space is really sort of the transparency of the property line, but it's more at a micro level than the macro level here. Do you consider that as borrowed space, Gary?
Yeah, and we are kind of staying at a macro level, so we went back and forth on little edges of this map, but if there's pieces like that you think we should add that make that point, absolutely.
I'm thinking more that it exists and that it probably isn't relevant to the framework that you're trying to develop here. That like I said, it's a micro level that just needs to be recognized but not necessarily mapped or diagrammed.
Right. Yeah, for me it's the big picture of this map more than maybe some of the specifics, but those orange lines the fact that, I guess going back to the earlier question about the amount of borrowed space, in other communities, there'd be a lot more of the orange lines than the green line, which is the private development edges, because there's so much more vacant property.
It's a sign of a mature community.
Pass the puck. Pass the puck. This is Jennifer. One of the other, this counts, but kind of looking at your definition of borrowed space and those kind of three diagrams of what borrowed space could potentially look like, that really leads to a discussion on how we as a city want to handle density placement moving forward. I'm kind of gathering that maybe that second illustration and the third illustration probably have the same amount of housing units, but the layout is very different. So if borrowed space is something that is important to us as a city, it needs to affect how we handle density and ask developers how to develop, i.e., do we start promoting cluster development that preserves those borrowed open spaces?
Yeah, there's great examples of cluster development in Littleton. The best examples are by water, but also near Highline in some cases, down in the South Park direction. So, but yeah, that is definitely part of the code framework that we usually try to bring forward on the development code side, is incentivizing cluster development. That's the starting point versus standard development being the baseline. When you're getting down to your final, last opportunities for significant development.
So this is Jason. One place that might be good to look at borrowed spaces along the perimeter of the city limits. I pointed out a park that's technically in Englewood, but is probably borrowed space for everyone along Windermere and Powers. Cornerstone Park. It's a pretty big feature. Another one actually was a development proposal that someone mentioned to Platte Canyon and Bowles. It's not in Littleton's jurisdiction, but currently it's just got some agriculture on it and a couple of sheds. That's probably borrowed space. So it might be worthwhile to take a look at the perimeter of the city just to see if there might be some in adjoining jurisdictions.
Yeah, appreciate that, Jason. We purposely decided not to, but we can go back. We kind of decided to just focus inward. I believe that was Jason.
Yes, thank you.
In our staff communication, we pointed to page 8 of that community character and future land use handout that had a set of policies, or at least the primer for some discussion on those. Has anyone spent any time with those or have any questions relative to those? I think your input for tomorrow night will be really important.
I have to say that, for me personally, just trying to get organized for tonight, plus add in Easter, etc. My looking at most of this information for tomorrow night will be tomorrow morning.
Okay.
So probably if the rest of us have the same problem.
And could I actually circle back on that? Because I did listen to most of your regular agenda meeting, and this little session tonight came together pretty quickly. But the thinking, Mark, was as we go forward, this is a way potentially to just have this type of informal interaction, but we can focus it more toward particular discussion items or things I might need to present. But yeah, I hear you. That's the challenge everywhere we work. A planning commission that has its regular business to do and is trying to do special initiatives like you saw tonight on your agenda, and so I hear you.
How does this, this borrowed space tie in with, what do we have, 30 acres per 1,000 residents? So we have incredible parks and open space. How does that tie in with this concept of borrowed space?
Yeah, I mean, where I'm going to start tomorrow night with the future land use map is that we put parks and open space and private recreation sites, which there aren't that many, but some of the homeowner association type tennis courts, pools, things like that. You put those three things on the map and 30% of the city is covered already. So that's right there is, you know, a third of your city nearly is not developed. So that's a great base to start from. And so because it's wound into different neighborhoods but then also in large areas along the river and elsewhere that many people can enjoy. So that's what you need to go.
And as I've mentioned to you before, it's you know, the three items that will get you tossed out of Littleton if you intrude is the neighborhoods, the parks, with an emphasis on maybe the Platte River and our downtown. So you're zeroing in on with this borrowed space and the parks, essentially an incredible amount of space in Littleton, an incredible amount of importance to Littletonites.
Well, that's why I'm on the phone, so I can't get to
Yeah.
So we have to figure out a great way to connect these great spaces from, I mean, right now Santa Fe is just this, I think, this huge border, right? To move from east to west, it's kind of tough to do to get to the river, which is our biggest spine of green space.
Yes.
So I see Santa Fe as just being a big border. So
how do we get across it when
Well,
Santa Fe changes?
Well, yeah. I mean, I can't remember what the gal's name was. It was on Planning Commission years ago, but she worked on trying to get the railroad depressed on the east side of the
Pat Kronberg?
Yeah.
Yep.
And so that was a major barrier at one time. And so now Santa Fe is our barrier to the river, in my opinion. So how do we
new challenges for us?
Yeah.
You know, especially.
Well, and I think somebody was saying about Fort Collins, like aim high, right? He's saying aim high, so that's something we got to aim high for, is how to deal with Santa Fe.
Yeah, and actually, you'll see on the starter future land use map that we have in tonight or tomorrow night's materials, we have on the downtown area an area that's called potential addition, and part of that is the other side of the Santa Fe. And legitimately, those feel like things that need to be part of downtown, but if Santa Fe is going to be even more so, a highway through the city in the future, how do you connect those and make them walkable, pedestrian, accessible to the rest of downtown?
So you say that, past challenge was the railroad. Our challenge today for us is Santa Fe. Everything else is 4, 5, and 6. 1, 2, and 3 is Santa Fe, in my opinion. What is it going to be 30 years from now? The challenge of our airport or something like that, or
Spaceport.
Spaceport. There we go, Spaceport. Yes. I'm old school. Sorry.
Gotta watch more Jetsons.
Yeah.
But I think this future land use map, how we have it so far, is very telling of we have large percentages of the city that we have no intention of doing anything with. And I think even getting, that might be in that wheel, like the percent of land in the city that we have no interest in changing.
It's your bright spots. So,
Right,
yeah,
I mean, it's your existing bright spots, and now where are we gonna focus our resources? It's in these areas of discussion, and that discussion starts tomorrow of, okay, what do we wanna see there? But I think, again, getting that message across that we have a very large percentage of the city that we think is great, and we're not touching.
Well, and when you combine that with the neighborhoods, which you're also not going to touch.
Correct.
Now you're talking about 80% of the community.
I think it's more towards 90%.
It'd be interesting
It's just,
Gary, is that something that you can like get a percentage pretty quickly? Like what percentage on this map, what percentage is that of the city that?
It's pretty good.
We're
It's
good.
in great shape. It's like you're saying, it's the sort of gray zones on this.
Yeah, that's what we're
This
looking
future
at,
land use
yeah.
map is, how much of that is, what percentage of that is the city? Just curious.
I think that area is for discussion map, right?
Yes.
That's the.
Yeah, so what's that per, Gary, do you have a quick way of calculating that?
Who are you asking? For 90.2% for the moment, to be determined.
Gary, are we still connected?
Oh, was that, I
Yeah.
couldn't hear
So
part of the discussion, I didn't know if that was for me.
So the question
what's
to
on
you,
What's on the map now as colors is about a little over 60%, or almost 2/3 of the city. The one thing I heard in your recent comments there was areas that we're not gonna touch, which I think was neighborhoods. That's been my question all along, is between potential additions to homes, are we gonna see a tear down wave and rebuilding at some point? As we've certainly seen in our part of the world.
So that can be done now under existing zoning.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, but economically and, as the city completely builds out in future years at some point, that's always been my question. So when we say we're not gonna touch them, well, but are they gonna evolve?
I think the touching
On
is,
the same lot.
touching is more, extending Windermere Street, which,
Well, it's
Guide, or any other streets, Arapahoe, or.
Alteration of
Anything.
current land use.
Yeah.
I mean, no, I think if somebody wants to do a pop top or scrape off and rebuild within the context of a given residential zoning area, no problem. But speaking for myself, I would be hard pressed to want to put forth a plan that suggested we were going to change zoning in residential neighborhoods. I mean, I just don't think that's going to happen.
But you could touch on, accessory dwelling units, perhaps, that
sure.
type of thing could be discussed and either rejected or accepted.
But those are code almost
Yes.
related, and what's permissible.
Well, it's future use, it's not just strictly code, it's policy.
No, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
That's actually where I was going is,
Do we need to establish?
if it turns into a wave of scraping and rebuilding, that's what we've seen in numerous cities. Is that sets off alarm bells at some time to where certain people may say, we've got to control this, stop this, and the same thing with accessory dwelling units. Once you go down that path.
If you want to stop it, you need a much larger historic preservation district.
Or design standards.
Oh, right, so I'm just saying, it may not be a big policy or public discussion item right now, but it can be.
Sure.
And I think a big piece to this will be the discussion about starting to define downtown. Most of that is in that areas for discussion. And you have a primer handout on that. But I think that'll be another important piece where your insights and experience with that will be really helpful tomorrow evening. I know you said you wanted to keep this short, so I want to be respectful of that time. So do you want to continue to have some discussion?
Is there any major items you want to cover that we haven't talked about already?
I mean, that really kind of walks us through the major land use pieces. Just to give you a heads up on the transportation master plan, what we've done is built on from the unifying vision and the guiding principles to really start to develop more of a systematic, holistic mission and set of goals for the transportation system. I think that too will be a really interesting conversation. We've never really done that as a city, to really define what we're working towards and the goals
That's a whole new discussion we've never had before.
Yeah, so I think we'll start with that piece. That's kind of how the structured conversation will go. And then we'll move into borrowed space. We'll talk future land use, areas for discussion, and part of that will be that defining downtown and starting that conversation. So Gary, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to highlight, but that's just kind of a primer for tomorrow evening. And what we'd like to do is in future meetings have a chance to do this. So we're already starting to think about your May meetings because those don't coincide with, there's no joint leadership meeting in May. And your meetings don't line up with when KKC will be here physically, but we could do this option of being on the phone again with Gary on either the 13th or your next meeting will be the 29th because of the holiday. So we'd love to keep having that conversation with you about, which one of those two meetings or both of those meetings, depending on, I think the conversation.
We talked about being involved and.
Okay.
And Kathleen and I can, in your packets, you have it, we can come up with discussion points that will probably be very closely related to what Gary was talking about on page 8 of the comp plan outline of like the land use and policy decisions that really need to be wrestled with. So,
yeah. Going to bring up one more topic that's always fascinated me. There's our 90% inner neighborhoods that are zoning-wise going to pretty much stay the same, POPs, et cetera. That's not zoning change, that's just improvements. There's our perimeter, our arterials, the four major, Littleton Boulevard, Santa Fe, Broadway, Mineral, the county line, thereabouts, okay. But the concept is rub zones where you have the arterials and then you have the rub zones or those arterials rubbing against residential areas. And that's where all the trouble usually comes from, is those rub zones. And it'd be nice to perhaps, and maybe some of your, the colors of your map kind of allude to those problem areas. It'd be nice to have a discussion, and might end up being a page in the comp plan that talks about the problems when this meets that. Any comment, Gary?
No, I agree with you, and we actually, I believe it's on the future land use draft map, the homes that directly built on Broadway, for example, we did not include them in the first wave of color, because we want to have that discussion. What is the future of lots like that are fronting on Broadway?
Okay. That would be a good discussion.
If I could throw in as well that, as I say, we just kind of put this together for tonight quickly, and but the intent is however we can help have better discussion than we sometimes have opportunity to at the joint leadership meetings. But I also suggest that it might be more helpful to us to do these after those meetings rather than before, after you've had all the presentation in the background, to then have some discussion, because that's what we're not having as much time to engage on.
Sounds good to everybody?
is that kind of what we do on the 13th?
On the 13th.
Okay. It's kind of a,
We're all nodding here, yes. Okay.
that's a great idea, Gary.
3 meetings.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to do is add another meeting for you guys. So that's always the question is, does this work to tack on to existing meeting nights? Or, one thought is, because we are there for the joint leadership meetings, is to, we've met at breakfast sometimes, meet the next morning. That may not work for everybody, but so we're flexible, just want to see what may work.
Yeah. We could toss it out, or we have a 5 o'clock discussion, the local watering hole, or right here, or what have you, or breakfast here. Has to be posted, I suppose, because we're more than 3. Yeah.
So the next Candid Keast visit will be the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd of May.
Okay, and our next meeting is
May 13th.
May 13th, but then the next one is the
29th.
Okay.
It will be Wednesday, the 29th, so it's, right now we have nothing on that agenda. So if you wanted to cancel that meeting and try to do some type of meeting with
Sure.
PKC when they're in town.
I think we're flexible. Any way to get more input here is.
Input?
No, just leave. I'll be driving to Iowa on the 29th.
Do you know, okay.
Well, then
Well,
we should
so-
do it.
I think you and your wife could,
This'll get you out of
like
that.
Pokemon State, right? I mean.
So
Running
we.
through the car's Bluetooth.
Yeah, all right, perfect. Love Kate.
Can you drive?
Yeah.
KKC's.
Right, so,
12 to
so
see
the
if there's
added
something.
benefit of the May trip is that Brett will be here for part of it. So Gary, maybe we can strategize on doing that with Brett Keast as well and have an opportunity for Planning Commission
Yeah, and if-
to take advantage of both you and Brett and Meredith all being in town at the same time.
So we maybe only 6 out of 9 commissioners can
Yeah.
make it. It still might be worth doing. We're not going to get everybody to show up for everything.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Well, thank you for the time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah, see
you for
tomorrow.
being so late, Carrie, sorry.
See you in the morning.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
I unfortunately probably will not be able to make it tomorrow night.
Oh, okay.
I would like to.
Well, no, I muted it.
Cancel out.
Sisters here.
Because Texas, he flies out first thing in the morning, like really early.
So have you guys
See
read
my
my
wife,
wife?
she's PO'd about all these.
I will admit.
Yeah, well, that's the reason I can't
Chosen
make it.
not
I'm really just
I wanna-
have the.
I want to go
Takes
through this
precedence.
like a.
Was that?
Are we adjourned?
Yeah, we're adjourned.
Okay.
I'm so
Sorry to. Okay.
We are. All right.